The CIA drugged innocent Americans with LSD for 77 straight days. Japanese doctors cut open conscious prisoners without anesthesia, and the U.S. military secretly sprayed bacteria over an entire city. These were real experiments approved by governments, conducted by respected scientists, and covered up for decades. Here are the most evil experiments of all time. Number 1. Project MKUltra. In 1953, at the height of the Cold War, the CIA launched one of the most notorious secret programs in American history. Codenamed Project MKUltra, this undercover operation turned ordinary American citizens into unwitting test subjects in a series of mind control experiments. The program was born from Cold War paranoia. After American prisoners in Korea began making strange confessions on camera, the CIA became convinced that the Soviets had mastered mind control techniques. Their response? To launch their own mind control program, one that would ultimately span 149 sub-projects across 80 institutions. Chemist Sidney Gottlieb oversaw the experiments, nicknamed the Black Sorcerer by his colleagues. Under his direction, the CIA began testing various drugs, particularly LSD, on unwitting American citizens. The goal? To find substances that could be used for mind control, behavior modification, and psychological torture. What makes MKUltra particularly disturbing is who they chose as test subjects. Mental patients, drug addicts, prisoners, anyone considered expendable was fair game. But they didn't stop there. The CIA also targeted ordinary citizens, luring them into fake research studies or simply dosing them without their knowledge. In one notorious case, the CIA set up fake brothels in San Francisco, where unsuspecting clients were secretly drugged while agents watched through two-way mirrors. In another, they hired prostitutes to slip LSD to their clients, leading to at least one death, that of Frank Olson, a U.S. Army biochemist who jumped to his death after being unknowingly dosed. The range of experiments conducted under MKUltra was staggering in both scope and brutality. Some subjects were forced to endure LSD dosing for 77 consecutive days, while others were secretly exposed to radiation without their knowledge or consent. The program pushed the boundaries of human endurance by administering electroshock therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power, far beyond any medical justification. Psychological manipulation reached new depths of cruelty, with victims subjected to extended periods of sensory deprivation combined with relentless verbal abuse. But perhaps most disturbing was the terminal experiments, tests conducted on people who were written off as expendable, with a full knowledge that the experiments would likely kill them. In 1973, when the Watergate scandal was making headlines, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. However, a clerical error saved about 20,000 documents from the shredder, documents that would later expose the true horror of the program during Senate hearings in 1975. Number 2. Unit 731. Experiments often dominate discussions of World War II atrocities. There was another facility that matched, and in many ways exceeded, their brutality. Hidden in occupied China, Unit 731 was Japan's top-secret biological and chemical warfare research facility, where thousands of victims were subjected to horrific experiments. Located in Manchuria, Unit 731's facility sprawled across 6 square kilometers, disguised as a water purification plant. But behind its walls, Japanese doctors conducted experiments that turned human beings into what they callously termed maruta, logs for the fire. Under the command of Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, the facility employed over 3,000 scientists and doctors. These weren't rogue actors or sadistic outliers. They were elite medical professionals from Japan's top universities, working with full government backing. The scale of human suffering at Unit 731 is almost impossible to comprehend. Estimates suggest that between 3,000 and 12,000 men, women, and children died in their experiments. Unlike the Nazi camps, where most victims were at least recorded, many of Unit 731's victims vanished without a trace. They were reduced to numbers, their humanity stripped away to make them easier to experiment upon. The experiments conducted at Unit 731 represent some of the most barbaric acts in human history. Victims were subjected to vivisection without anesthesia, cut open while fully conscious as doctors studied the effects of diseases on their living organs. Prisoners became unwilling test subjects for biological warfare, deliberately infected with plague, cholera, and anthrax, and then forced to live among healthy inmates to study transmission. In brutal frostbite experiments, victims' limbs were repeatedly frozen and thawed in -40°C temperatures before being amputated without painkillers. But perhaps most horrific were the pregnancy experiments, where women were deliberately infected with diseases, or worse, forcibly impregnated, to study the effects on both mother and unborn child. What happened after Unit 731's horrific experiments might be just as disturbing as the experiments themselves. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Unit 731 731's facilities were destroyed, and its remaining prisoners were executed to eliminate witnesses. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. The United States, eager to obtain Unit 731's research data, struck a secret deal. In exchange for their data on biological warfare, the U.S. granted immunity to Unit 731's scientists, including its leader, Shiro Ishii. Number 3. Operation Sea Spray. Just 5 years after condemning Nazi and Japanese experiments, the U.S. military conducted its own secret biological warfare test on American citizens. In September 1950, a Navy ship quietly sailed through San Francisco Bay, spraying a mysterious mist. For 6 days, the USS Bluebird released clouds of Serratia marcescens, a bacteria chosen because its reddish color would make it easy to track. The military's goal was simple but chilling. They wanted to see how vulnerable American cities were to biological warfare. San Francisco, with its unique geography and fog patterns, was deemed the perfect testing ground. The entire city of San Francisco became an unwitting laboratory. Nearly 800,000 residents were exposed to the bacterial cloud without their knowledge or consent. The military tracked how the bacteria spread through the city, infiltrating homes, businesses, and hospitals. The authorities claimed the bacteria was harmless, but within days, hospitals began reporting unusual infections. At Stanford University Hospital, 11 patients developed severe urinary tract infections. One patient, Edward Nevin, died after the bacteria infected his heart valve. The government kept Operation Sea Spray secret for decades. It wasn't until 1976 that the truth finally came out, and the Nevin family discovered why their healthy 75-year-old patriarch had suddenly died. But San Francisco wasn't alone. Declassified documents later revealed that similar tests were conducted in New York City's subway system, Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal, and Washington, D.C.'s National Airport. Number 4. Human guinea pigs for profit. Behind the walls of Philadelphia's Holmesburg prison, from 1951 to 1974, inmates became unwitting test subjects in what one doctor chillingly described as a perfect laboratory, acres of skin. Dr. Albert Kligman, a dermatologist working for major pharmaceutical companies and the U.S. military, transformed this prison into a secret testing facility where human suffering was measured in dollars and cents. The experiments were technically voluntary, but with payments of up to $1,500 to participate, desperate inmates couldn't resist, even though they had no idea what they were really signing up for. The reality was horrific. Prisoners had chemical weapons tested on their skin, causing severe burns and permanent scarring. Others were injected with dioxin, the main component of Agent Orange, to measure its toxic effects. Some inmates had patches of their skin removed and replaced with animal skin to study rejection rates. Radioactive isotopes were administered to observe their effects on human tissue, while psychoactive drugs were tested without warning or consent. Perhaps most disturbing was the perfection of Agent Orange testing. Prisoners developed severe chloracne, painful, disfiguring skin eruptions that persisted for years. Many later developed rare cancers and devastating health conditions. One former inmate described having his back covered in patches of various chemicals that burned through multiple layers of skin, leaving permanent scars and causing lifelong health issues. The experiments were so severe that some participants begged to be executed rather than continue as test subjects. The true horror of Holmesburg lies not just in the physical torture, but in the cold calculation behind it. Major pharmaceutical companies and government agencies paid millions to use prisoners as disposable test subjects. Dr. Kligman, far from being punished, became wealthy from these experiments and went on to invent Retin A, building his fortune on the suffering of hundreds of inmates. When later questioned about ethics, he famously remarked, "My view is that shutting the prison experiments down was a big mistake. My use of prison inmates was purely for medical advancement." Number 5. The Stanford Prison Experiment. While not as physically brutal as our previous examples, the Stanford Prison Experiment reveals something perhaps even more disturbing. In 1971, Stanford psychology professor Philip Zimbardo recruited 24 male college students for a 2-week study of prison life. The basement of Stanford's psychology building was transformed into a mock prison, complete with cells and surveillance cameras. The students were randomly divided into 2 groups, guards and prisoners. What started as role play quickly spiraled into real psychological torture. Within days, the guards began abusing their power in increasingly sadistic ways. The guards' behavior quickly devolved into systematic psychological torture. Their demands became increasingly degrading, forcing prisoners to clean toilet bowls with bare hands and perform endless push-ups while guards sat on their backs. The humiliation escalated as prisoners were ordered to strip naked and simulate sexual acts. Basic human dignity was stripped away as inmates were forced to sleep on bare concrete without blankets and defecate in buckets they weren't allowed to empty. What began as role play had transformed transformed into a real-world demonstration of how quickly power can corrupt ordinary people. One guard, nicknamed John Wayne by the prisoners, became particularly cruel. He forced prisoners to chant obscenities and sexually humiliate themselves. Later, he admitted he was consciously testing how far he could go. The experiment was planned for 2 weeks. It lasted only 6 days. Several prisoners had emotional breakdowns. One began screaming uncontrollably after just 36 hours. Another developed a psychosomatic rash over his entire body. By the 5th day, some were showing signs of severe depression and acute anxiety. So what do you think? Which of these experiments shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos exploring the darker side of human history.